Greetings and salutations, Redeemers, and welcome to another episode of Recipe Redemption. I'm Mike Uyak. Today I present to you two cookies, both alike in dignity and yet very, very different from one another. One, a decidedly vintage cookie recipe, and the other a bit more modern, but it has its roots in sort of colonial era sort of survival cookies, I guess you might call them. So the first is from 1953, from that year's edition of Stove Pilot. Favorite recipes from Maxwell Air Force Base Women's Club, collected recipes of all the wives. And it's for bacon grease cookies. It's better than it sounds. Stay with me. The other is a little bit more modern, but like I said, it has its roots in the past, and it's Carol's Beet and Acorn Cookies from the Walking Dead TV series. Now, I believe, as sort of a little background, I think it was season 4. I don't remember. It's been a long time. Our intrepid group of survivors comes across Alexandria, Virginia, and this town has managed to weather the zombie apocalypse by walling off a big portion of town and instituting, some level of self-government. And they're doing relatively well compared to the rest of the world, apparently. But supplies are tight. And so when one of our main group of survivors, Carol, decides to make a treat for everyone, she goes into the pantry and scrounges what she can, and uses her ingenuity to stretch the ingredients that she has sort of allotted as her ration, in order to create these cookies. And they do use a wide variety of ingredients, and you can sort of understand how, if, let's say, you want to make a big batch of cookies for 15 or 20 people, but you only get a cup or a cup and a half worth of flour, because who's growing wheat in the middle of the zombie apocalypse? So what do? You use acorn flour, which is readily available. You can harvest acorns in the fall, after they fall from the oak trees, grind them up into a flour that keeps for a very long time, and that can replace some of the wheat flour that you might otherwise use in your baked goods. Also uses arrowroot starch, since the acorn flour doesn't have a whole lot of the gluten that wheat flour has. You need something to kind of stick everything together, if you don't have a whole lot of wheat flour in there and you're substituting something that doesn't really clump when you wet it and cook it, like the acorn flour doesn't do. So you add arrowroot powder. Beet, since you're a little bit limited in how much sugar you may have available, or honey or other sweeteners, so beet has a certain sweetness to it. If you can actually get sugar beets, you're in like Flint. But regular red beets have a certain sweetness to them. They will also add a bit of structure if you don't grate them too finely. The fiber, certainly, and just the fibrousness of the beet can help to add a little more structure to your cookie. So I was surprised that they didn't actually call for things like molasses or things like that, because more than likely you would actually find that raiding people's pantries. A lot of people would go for the canned goods, and the regular foods that you can sort of eat right out of the can as far as survival foods, and they might not think to raid things like baking supplies. But molasses, although we don't really think of just eating straight molasses, it might be a source of calories if it's a survival situation. So, I was actually surprised that they didn't actually incorporate some molasses into these cookies. But in any case, I'll post the recipe here, and it's up online. They created this recipe specifically because there was interest after they broadcast that episode. So the recipe is readily available online. So this is how I made them. Okay, going to start with my beaten acorn cookies. In a blender, I have half a cup of shortening, cup of brown sugar, half a cup of white sugar, half a cup of cooked beets, 1/2 cup of water chestnuts, which is basically a whole can, half a teaspoon of vanilla, and I just put a half a cup of melted chocolate chips. Blend that to combine. In my mixing bowl, I have a cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of acorn flour, which you can get off the internet, 2 tablespoons of arrowroot, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, baking powder, baking soda, and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. To this, I am adding the wet stuff. You'll notice I only added about half. In order to get it to actually blend properly, I needed to make a double batch of the wet stuff. So once that's all mixed together and well incorporated, no floury bits, I spoon this out onto my sill pad on my baking sheet and flatten it out. These are 2.5 to 3 inch diameter cookies. They'll puff up a little bit, but not really a whole lot. Bake this at 350 for about 10 to 12 minutes. I ended up baking it a little longer, and then let cool on a wire rack. Those are your beaten acorn cookies. Next up are bacon fat chocolate chip cookies. I have vanilla, bacon grease, white sugar, brown sugar, and an egg. Oh, and a pinch of salt in here too. And it takes a moment to incorporate that bacon grease in, but once you have it mixed in, it becomes a nice smooth mixture. In another bowl, I have all-purpose flour, chocolate chips, salt, and baking soda. And I'm just adding the wet ingredients to the dry and mixing to combine. This ended up being a little bit dry, so I did add some milk, probably about a 1/4 cup all told, just in little splashes at a time, just until it became a moist, not too sticky mixture. Then roll into balls, place onto my Silpat covered baking sheet, and squish down with 2 fingers. Then baked at, again, 350 for about 15 minutes. You'll want to check it at about the 12-minute point. Some ovens may vary. And then allow to cool completely. Now it's time to try them. First, the beaten acorn cookies. Now, there is melted chocolate in these, but it serves you to remember this is not really a chocolate chip cookie, because you melted the chocolate first of all, so you don't have discrete chips. But also, there's not a whole lot. It's not the overriding flavor. I don't think it's meant to be. So they're dense. They're cakier cookies. And I think the acorn flour, I don't know if it would have benefited from sort of dry toasting the acorn flour before adding it in. There is sort of it kind of gives me this sort of a raw grain sort of flavor that I'm sure I feel like it's undeserved. These are fully baked. I baked these for actually because my wonky oven. Um, I ended up baking these for twice as long as the recipe called for, just because I don't know what temperature my oven's at. Even so, it tastes almost like these aren't done, but they're very clearly done. They're nice and they're still moist, but they're not wet in the middle. They're okay. There's a little of that chocolate flavor in there, but it's almost, especially with that dry sort of grain flavor, it turns the chocolate into sort of almost like I had added cocoa powder instead of like milk chocolate. It's definitely not as sweet as you expect a cookie to be. It's sweet, but, and in the zombie apocalypse, every little treat is a treat. Um, don't know that I'm going out of my way to make these again, but then again, I might, because I got a whole bag of acorn flour now, and I don't know what to do with it. It's kind of the, I don't know, I'll say side effect rather than drawback of doing this channel. I have a pantry full of really weird ingredients that I've used once and then I don't know what to do with because I really don't want to make that dish again. So, I don't know. In any case, hopefully the bacon chocolate chip cookies are better now. You notice these ones, I actually put chopped pieces of the bacon as a topper on the cookie. Don't want them to go to waste, after all. Mm. These are good. The bacon adds a saltiness, a smokiness to it, in addition to a fairly decent chocolate chip cookie. And this isn't really as weird as it sounds at first. A lot of original, particularly mid 20th century recipes, made use of lard as the sort of baking fat of choice. Before we developed, you know, trans fatty acids and shortenings to sort of replace lard in our pantry as the fat of choice. But before that, we used a lot of lard. And what is bacon grease? But basically, lard with salt. It's rendered pork fat, and it just happens to bring with it a whole lot more flavor. Because in cooking bacon, the bacon browns and lends that sort of Maillard reaction, that toastiness, to the flavor of the fat, in addition to the salt that comes off of it and the residual smoke and cure from the bacon all goes into the grease and then into your cookie. So even if I didn't have the bacon bits, don't want to lose any bacon. Even if I didn't have the bacon bits on there, the cookie itself has a very discernible salt level and smokiness and sort of an increased umami-ness, I guess. But the sugar, brown sugar, chocolate chips, and vanilla, they're all still present in the cookie. It is a surprisingly well-balanced cookie. These are dangerous. I have to give some of these away because otherwise we will finish this whole batch ourselves. And that's clearly not something I need. So What other unusual cookie recipes are out there? Send them my way. I would love to try them. And just let me know down in the comments below. And I'd like to thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time here on Recipe Redemption. Bye now.